Welcome to the next installment of my video lecture series in economics. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be taking a look at how the labor market varies, particularly when you have a manufacturing site that is isolated versus you have many firms that cluster together in a pool of manufacturing. And this is for Urban Economics Chapter 3, and it relates to Figure 3-3. So again, what we're going to be taking a look at is how the labor market varies between if you have an isolated manufacturing site versus a cluster of many firms. So at first, we're going to be taking a look at an isolated site. And as you can see here, the labor supply is vertical at the number of workers at that site. The reason for this is that the isolated firm is not going to face any competition for labor in that area. So in order to make this a simplified analysis, we're just going to assume that it is perfectly inelastic. That is, that the number of workers does not vary with the wage rate, that the number of workers is fixed, the supply of workers is fixed at that particular amount, in this particular example 12, and that all those different wage rates, the labor supply is going to be fixed at 12. So what we're concerned with is what's going to happen at this particular firm that is isolated as it relates to different demand conditions. Let's say the firm faces some seasonal fluctuations in the demand for their product. So in certain times of the year, demand is low, while in other areas, other times of the year, labor is high. Demand is high for their particular product and how that impacts the wage rate. So if we have low demand, the wage rate is going to be determined by where the low demand curve intersects the supply curve. And here we just have it signified by WLD, which is the wage rate when there's low demand. So as in any other equilibrium where demand intersects supply, that gives us what the equilibrium wage rate is going to be during this low demand time. Alternately, we've already stated that there could be fluctuation in demand, so we can also have a period of high demand. So that wage rate will be different than the low demand. It's going to be where the high demand for labor, when the demand for the product of this isolated firm is higher than the low demand, where that intersects the supply curve. And we can see that the high demand generates a higher wage rate versus the low demand wage rate. So because this site is isolated, the number of workers, the level of employment is fixed, but the wage rate varies depending upon the type of demand that this isolated firm faces. Now, if we want to compare that to a cluster of many firms, that the supply is going to be perfectly elastic, all right? Because this firm does face competition, so in essence, we're going to see a higher level of competition in this marketplace. So the wage rate is in essence going to be the market wage rate that's determined by all these firms in the marketplace. So therefore, it is going to be horizontal. So again, we're going to take a look at a period when there's low demand. And as you can see here, the equilibrium is going to be where the low demand intersects the supply curve. And you can see that this gives us the market wage rate and the number of workers used at 8. Now, once we get to the period where the demand for this particular product is high, the demand curve shifts to the right, and this causes the number of workers to be demanded to be equal to 12. So the wage rate is fixed because we have, in essence, a perfectly competitive marketplace, and the wage rate is set in that market. And how firms in this cluster of firms react to changes or fluctuations in demand is that they just adjust their employment level. When it's low demand, they hire fewer workers, and when it's high demand, they hire more workers. When we have low demand, a fewer number of workers are being hired, and when there's high demand, more workers are being hired. So make sure you're comfortable with the distinction between those two, and that's just a quick review. Make sure that you understand that with an isolated site, the labor supply is perfectly inelastic. This causes wages to fluctuate with demand, but the unemployment level is fixed. When we take a look at a clustering of firms, the labor supply is perfectly elastic, wages are fixed, and the employment level varies with fluctuations in demand.